Who is the Nancy Pelosi? Revealing his power and influence. What do you know about Nancy Pelosi? The second and final part. If we find something new, we will publish it to you. By early 2010, analysts were assessing Pelosi as possibly the most powerful woman in U.S. history and among the most powerful speakers of the previous 100 years. Later in 2010, Gail Russell Chaddock of the Christian Science Monitor opined that Pelosi was the most powerful House Speaker since Sam Rayburn a half-century ago, adding that she had also been one of the most partisan. Pelosi's first speakership was favorably assessed by scholars. In late 2010, Norman Ornstein, a congressional scholar at the conservative-leaning American Enterprise Institute, opined that despite polarized public opinion of Pelosi, she's going to rank quite high in the pantheon of modern speakers, declaring that the only speaker of the previous 100 years that he would rank higher than Pelosi was Sam Rayburn. Catholic University of America political scientist Matthew Green opined that 111th Congress had been remarkable in its productivity, in both the number of bills enacted and their scope, and Pelosi shares much of the credit. In November 2010, Brian Naylor of NPR opined that during Nancy Pelosi's 4 years as Speaker of the House, Congress approved the health care overhaul, widely considered the most significant piece of domestic legislation since Medicare, along with an $800 billion measure to stimulate the economy and a multi-billion-dollar rescue of the banks. It is a legislative legacy that rivals the accomplishments of any speaker in modern times. In November 2010, after Democrats lost their House majority, Politico writer John Bresnahan called Pelosi's record as Speaker mixed. He opined that Pelosi had been a powerful speaker, describing her as wielding an iron fist in a Gucci glove and having held enormous power within the House Democratic caucus, but noting that she had a horrible approval rating with the rest of America. Bresnahan wrote that Pelosi's leadership and the legislative agenda she advanced had significantly contributed to the party's loss of its House majority, citing the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act as an example of legislation that hurt the Democrats electorally in 2010. Bresnahan also believed that, ahead of the 2010 elections, Pelosi had disastrously misread public opinion, and that Pelosi had been a poor orator. Thomas Mann of the Brookings Institution later opined that Pelosi had been the strongest and most effective speaker of modern times during her first speakership. In 2018, Robert Draper wrote for the New York Times Magazine, during Nancy Pelosi's 4 years as Speaker, there was no confusion as to who was in control. Pelosi used the tools at her disposal, committee assignments, campaign donations, to establish a balance among her party's coalitions while also reminding everyone that her job was not simply to officiate and appease. But as Newt Gingrich learned the hard way 2 decades ago, an autocratic speaker is a short-lived one. Pelosi's reign was successful because she understood the will of her caucus rather than bending it to hers. Draper also wrote that for all her mastery of Washington's inside game, Pelosi has never been a deft public-facing politician, and called her a poor orator. Though Pelosi was re-elected by a comfortable margin in the 2010 elections, the Democrats lost 63 seats and control of the House of Representatives to the Republicans. After this setback, Pelosi sought to continue leading the House Democratic Caucus as Minority Leader, the office she held before becoming Speaker. Inter-party opposition failed to pass a motion to delay the leadership vote, though she faced a challenge from Representative Heath Shuler. Shuler lost to Pelosi, 150-43, in the caucus vote on November 17, 2010. On the opening day of the 112th Congress, Pelosi was elected Minority Leader. In November 2011, 60 Minutes alleged that Pelosi and several other members of Congress had used information they gleaned from closed sessions to make money on the stock market. The program cited her purchases of Visa Inc. stock while a bill that would limit credit card fees was in the House. Pelosi denied the allegations and called the report a right-wing smear. When the Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge Act or STOCK Act was introduced the next year, she voted for it and lauded its passing. Of Representatives Louise Slaughter and Tim Walz, who drafted the bill, Pelosi said they shined a light on a gaping hole in our ethics laws and helped close it once and for all. On November 14, 2012, she announced she would remain Democratic leader. In August 2016, Pelosi said that her personal contact information had been posted online following a cyber attack against top Democratic campaign committees, and she had received obscene and sick calls, voicemails, and text messages. She warned members of Congress to avoid letting children or family members answer phone calls or read text messages. At times, centrists, progressive candidates, and incumbent Democrats all expressed opposition to Pelosi's continued tenure as the party's House leader. Prompted by colleagues after the 2016 presidential election, Tim Ryan of Ohio initiated a bid to replace Pelosi as House Minority Leader on November 17, 2016. After Pelosi agreed to give more leadership opportunities to junior members, she defeated Ryan by a vote of 134-63 on November 30th. In 2017, after Democrats lost 4 consecutive special elections in the House of Representatives, Pelosi's leadership was again called into question. In June 2017, Representative Kathleen Rice of New York and a small group of other House Democrats, including Congressional Black Caucus Chairman Cedric Richmond, held a closed-door meeting to discuss potential new Democratic leadership. Other House Democrats, including Ryan, Seth Moulton, and Fileman Vela, publicly called for new House leadership. In an interview, Rice said, "If you were talking about a company that was posting losing numbers, if you were talking about any sports team that was losing time and time again, changes would be made, right? The CEO out. The coach would be out and there would be a new strategy put in place." In a press conference, Pelosi defended her leadership, saying, "I respect any opinion that my members have, but my decision about how long I stay is not up to them." When asked specifically why she should stay on as House Minority Leader after numerous Democratic seats were lost, she responded, "Well, I'm a master legislator. I am a strategic, politically astute leader. My leadership is recognized by many around the country, and that is why I'm able to attract the support that I do." In November 2017, after Pelosi called for John Kinnear's resignation over allegations of harassment, she convened the first in a series of planned meetings on strategies to address reforming workplace policies in the wake of national attention to sexual harassment. She said Congress had a moral duty to the brave women and men coming forward to seize this moment and demonstrate real, effective leadership to foster a climate of respect and dignity in the workplace. In February 2018, Pelosi sent a letter to Speaker Paul Ryan about the proposed public release of a memo prepared by Republican staff at the direction of House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. The memo attacked the Federal Bureau of Investigation for its investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 United States election. Pelosi said the FBI and the Department of Justice had warned Nunes and Ryan that the memo was inaccurate and that its release could threaten national security by disclosing federal surveillance methods. She added that Republicans were engaged in a cover-up campaign to protect Trump. House Republicans' pattern of obstruction and cover-up to hide the truth about the Trump-Russia scandal represents a threat to our intelligence and our national security. The GOP has led a partisan effort to distort intelligence and discredit the U.S. law enforcement and intelligence communities. She charged Nunes with deliberately dishonest actions and called for his immediate removal from his position. In February 2018, Pelosi broke the record for longest House speech using the magic minute custom when she spent more than 8 hours recounting stories from DRE MERS, people brought to the United States as minors by undocumented immigrants, to object to a budget deal that would raise spending caps without addressing the future of DACA recipients who were at risk of deportation by the Trump administration. In May 2018, after the White House invited 2 Republicans and no Democrats to a Department of Justice briefing on an FBI informant who had made contact with the Trump campaign, Pelosi and Schumer sent a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and FBI Director Wray calling for a bipartisan Gang of 8 briefing that involves congressional leadership from both chambers. In August 2018, Pelosi called for Duncan D. Hunter's resignation after his indictment on charges of misusing at least $250,000 in campaign funds, saying the charges were evidence of the rampant culture of corruption among Republicans in Washington today. In April 2018, Peter Beinart wrote in The Atlantic that Pelosi had been the most effective congressional leader of modern times and, not coincidentally, the most vilified. In the 2018 elections, the Democrats recaptured a House majority, gaining 41 seats. This was the party's largest gain in the House since the 1974 post-Watergate election. On November 28, House Democrats nominated Pelosi to once again serve as Speaker. She was re-elected to the speakership at the start of the 116th Congress on January 3, 2019. Pelosi clinched the speakership after weeks of whittling down opposition from some fellow Democrats seeking a new generation of leadership. The deal to win over holdouts put an expiration date on her tenure. She promised not to stay more than 4 years in the job. 220 House Democrats voted for Pelosi as Speaker, and 15 for someone else or no one. On February 4, 2020, at the conclusion of Trump's State of the Union address, Pelosi tore up her official copy of it. Her stated reason for doing so was because it was a courteous thing to do considering the alternatives. It was such a dirty speech. Trump and other Republicans criticized her for this. In December 2021, Pelosi announced her candidacy for re-election to the House in 2022. In 2018, and again in 2020, she had agreed not to stay on as Speaker beyond January 2023, but otherwise avoided questions about her future. In 2022, Pelosi was re-elected, but the Democratic Party lost the House majority. 10 days later, she announced that she would not seek a Democratic leadership post in the next Congress. At the start of the 116th Congress, Pelosi opposed Trump's attempts to use the 218,219 federal government shutdown, which she called a hostage-taking of civil servants, as leverage to build a substantial wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. She declined to allow Trump to give the State of the Union address in the House chamber while the shutdown was ongoing. After several polls showed Trump's popularity sharply falling due to the shutdown, on January 25, 2019, Trump signed a stopgap bill to reopen the government without any concessions regarding a border wall for 3 weeks to allow negotiations on an appropriations bill. But he reiterated his demand for border wall funding and said he would shut the government down again or declare a national emergency and use military funding to build the wall if Congress did not appropriate the funds by February 15. On February 15, Trump declared a national emergency in order to bypass Congress, after being unsatisfied with a bipartisan bill that had passed the House and Senate the day before. On September 29, 2019, Pelosi announced the launch of an impeachment inquiry against Trump. On December 5, 2019, after the inquiry had taken place, Pelosi authorized the Judiciary Committee to begin drafting articles of impeachment. After hearings were held, 2 articles of impeachment were announced on December 10. The House of Representatives approved both articles on December 18, thereby formally impeaching. The day after the January 6 United States Capitol attack, Pelosi demanded that Trump either resign or be removed from office through the clauses of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, threatening impeachment if this did not happen. On January 10, she issued a 24-hour ultimatum to Vice President Mike Pence that if he did not invoke the 25th Amendment, she would proceed with legislation to impeach Trump. On January 13, the House voted to impeach Trump a second time. Pelosi aided with the passage of the CARES Act. She attracted controversy when footage emerged in early September 2020 of her visiting a hair salon in San Francisco. This was contrary to regulations enforced at that time preventing service indoors. Criticized for hypocrisy by Trump and the owners of the salon, Pelosi described the situation as clearly a setup. Her stylist and other Democrats defended her. Pelosi played a key role in the 2021 passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The New York Times credited the legislation's passage to Pelosi's decision to adopt a Congressional Black Caucus proposal to pair together the final vote on the bill with a good faith vote on the rules governing debate on a subsequent social safety net bill. The Times noted that Pelosi did not make herself the public face of this, instead having Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Joyce Beatty persuade House Democratic Caucus members to accept the proposal. During the 117th Congress, the CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and Honoring Our Pact Act of 2022 Pact Act were passed. As with her first tenure, experts gave Pelosi's second tenure as Speaker high marks, with many opining that during her 2 tenures as Speaker she had been among the most effective people to hold the position. In June 2019, Brent Budowski opined in The Hill that Pelosi had been the most important, consequential, and effective speaker since Tip O'Neill, as well as one of the greatest speakers who ever served. In January 2020, on the eve of Trump's first impeachment trial before the U.S. Senate, Washington Post political writer Paul Kane called Pelosi the most powerful House Speaker in at least 25 years, noting that some historians were comparing her influence to that of former Speaker Sam Rayburn. In 2021, former Republican Speaker John Boehner opined that Pelosi had been the most powerful House Speaker in U.S. history. In November 2022, Chris Cillizza wrote that Pelosi was the most effective speaker ever. Jonathan Bernstein opined for The Washington Post and Bloomberg News that Pelosi was the greatest speaker in history. Jackie Commies of the Los Angeles Times also opined that Pelosi had been the greatest speaker in history. Sarah Ferris of Politico called Pelosi a legislative giant regarded as one of the most powerful speakers in modern U.S. history. Historian Lindsay M. Chervinsky wrote for NBC News that Pelosi was one of the most effective speakers in history and had been so while facing the double standards that apply to powerful women. John Haddock wrote for the Brookings Institution, "Whether you agree with her politics or not, it is undeniable that Pelosi has been a remarkably effective House leader. That success has come as both House Minority Leader and as Speaker of the House. As Speaker, she has worked with a majority as large as 81 seats in November and December 2009. 258, 177 and one as small as 6 seats from April to May 2021, 218, 212. A number of progressive and liberal-leaning outlets published strong assessments of Pelosi's tenure. Harold Mayerson opined that Pelosi had been the greatest speaker in U.S. History in an article in the American Prospect. Amanda Marcotte of Salon.com opined that Pelosi was the greatest speaker of all time, calling her both the most effective and most progressive House Speaker of all time. Marcotte added that Pelosi had been effective both in terms of managing an unruly caucus and being able to push her party in more progressive directions. On November 29, 2022, the Steering and Policy Committee of the House Democratic Caucus honorarily named Pelosi Speaker Emerita in the upcoming 118th U.S. Congress. Her second speakership and her participation in the House Democratic Party leadership concluded on January 3, 2023, at the end of the 117th Congress. In the House, Pelosi served on the Appropriations and Intelligence Committees and was the ranking member on the latter until her election as Minority Leader. She is a member of the House Baltic Caucus. Early in her political career, Pelosi established herself as a prominent fundraiser in the party. She was one of the party's most prolific fundraisers, transferring significant funds to committees for other candidates. During the 2000 and 2002 election cycles, compared to other members of Congress, she contributed the most money to other congressional campaigns. In 2006, Pelosi was the Democratic Party's third-largest fundraiser, behind former First Couple Bill and Hillary Clinton. From 2003 to 2014, Pelosi raised more than $400 million in campaign funds. Pelosi was a founding member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, but left in 2003 after being elected House Minority Leader. In 2001, she voted in favor of the USA Patriot Act, but voted against reauthorization of certain provisions in 2005. She voted against a constitutional amendment banning flag burning. Pelosi voted against the Secure Fence Act of 2006. In June 2018, Pelosi visited a federal facility used to detain migrant children separated from their parents and subsequently called for the resignation of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. In July, Pelosi characterized the compromise immigration bill by the Republicans as a deal with the devil and said she had not had conversations with House Speaker Ryan about a legislative solution to the separation of families at the southern border. In April 2021, after southern border crossings peaked, House Republicans criticized Pelosi for saying that immigration under the Biden administration was on a good path. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported that nearly 19,000 unaccompanied minors arrived in March. Pelosi has long supported LGBT rights. In 1996, she voted against the Defense of Marriage Act, and in 2004 and 2006, she voted against the proposed federal marriage amendment, which would amend the United States Constitution to define marriage federally as being between one man and one woman, thereby overriding states' individual rights to legalize same-sex marriage. When the Supreme Court of California overturned the state's ban on marriage between same-sex couples in 2008, Pelosi released a statement welcoming the historic decision. She also indirectly voiced her opposition to California Proposition 8, a successful 2008 state ballot initiative which defined marriage in California as a union between one man and one woman. In 2012, Pelosi said her position on LGBT rights such as same-sex marriage grows from and reflects her Catholic faith. It also places her at odds with Catholic doctrine, which defines marriage as a union between one man and one woman. She said, "My religion compels me, and I love it for it, to be against discrimination of any kind in our country, and I consider the ban on gay marriage a form of discrimination. I think it's unconstitutional on top of that." Pelosi supports the Equality Act, a bill that would expand the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964 to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In 2019, she spoke in Congress in favor of the bill and called for ending discrimination against LGBT people. Pelosi also opposes Trump's transgender military ban. Pelosi supports reform in marijuana law, although NORML's Deputy Director Paul Armentano said she and other members of Congress had not done anything to change the laws. She also supports use of medical marijuana. As Speaker of the House, Pelosi quietly moved the statue of Robert E. Lee from the National Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol to the Capitol Crypt. In Lee's place, she had a statue of Rosa Parks erected. I stop at this point today. Thank you for watching. I hope I added something to you. You enjoyed the last few minutes. We will meet with you soon.